Hello, guys. We are going to talk about types of strategy and strategies in the second language. So, an approach to classifying language learning strategies that has been much quoted was proposed by O'Malley and Kamat. It divides strategies into metacognitive, planning for, monitoring, or evaluating the success of a learning activity. Cognitive: operating directly on incoming information, manipulating it in ways that enhance learning. And social affective: interacting with another person to assist learning. In this table, here, we see examples of communication strategies in listening. The listener A decodes only a few words: better, left, road, drive, see sign, and Ontario. Using the sequence in which the words occur, she guesses that the speaker is advising her to turn left at the road ahead and to go on until she sees a sign to Ontario. Listener B only manages to decode the words greenhouse gases, keeping heat, atmosphere, water, reduces, heat, loss, and surface. From her knowledge of the topic, she reconstructs the lecturer's point. Listener C believes she has heard the speaker mention a radio ham. She notes that this is a tentative match and checks it against what comes next. Listener D comes across a new word in the utterance. I've never really liked, though they said it's healthier than butter. She used knowledge and the rest of the sentence to work out the meaning of the word. Listener E is not sure whether the speaker said to the park to meet her or to the parking meter. She carries both hypotheses forward and checks them against what comes next. Listener F understood very little of what was said, but she knows that the speakers tend to repeat themselves, so she decides to ignore it. And listener G thinks that the speaker says something about a sexy phone. Knowing the speaker, she considers it unlikely. She asks the speakers to repeat what he said. So, when writers analyze strategies, the types mentioned here were chosen very much with second language speaking in mind, but they adapt well to the circumstances of the listener. A strategic listener might avoid A. Ignore what has been said in the hope that is not of major importance. B. Accept a very general version of the speaker's meaning. Another, achieve. Attempt to construct a meaning on the basis of incomplete bottom-up evidence. And the last one, repair. Appeal to the interlocutor. These three response types are very broad, but they provide a useful starting point. They account for all of the sample in the previous table, with the first five representing different types of achievement, listener F representing avoidance and listener G repair. Their merit is that they refer to phenomena that are concrete and demonstrable. So, in the screen appear another table that is proactive strategies of second language listening, or L2 listening. So, listener H realized that her decoding skills are weak and therefore rehearses in her mind what the speaker is likely to say before meeting him. Listener I thinks carefully before listening about what level of detail she needs to extract from the speaker, so she will not be bothered by passages she does not understand. Listener J knows that the demands of decoding a lecture in a second language may prevent her from remembering all the information she has obtained. From time to time, she mentally rehearses the lecture's points so far. Listener K thinks about the topic before listening to a recording. She tries to predict what words she will hear, then listens out for them. Listener L has been told by her teacher to look carefully at the wording of the questions in a test, then to listen out for familiar words in the recording. And the last one, listener M, knows that she has a special difficulty in decoding L2 spoken by hesitant speakers. She gives extra attention to their utterances. To summarize, we have now identified four types of strategy. Avoidance strategies. Learner gets by without the missing or uncertain piece of input. Achievement strategies. A learner attempts to make maximum sense of what has been decoded. Repair strategies. Learner appeals for help. And proactive strategies. Learner plans her behavior in a way that might enable problems of understanding to be avoided. So that's all of my point, and let's move to another point.
15.5 A listing of L2 listening strategies. The purpose of this chapter has been to mark out the areas of strategies that seems particularly relevant to a second language listening program. Also, these strategies are adapted by L2 listeners in order to deal with problems caused by a breakdown of understanding. Table 15.5 Proactive strategies for listening. These strategies are exclusively cognitive and social. These are also metacognitive techniques that are closely related with listening. The most important factor in here is task evaluation. And in here, the teacher must ensure that the learner is able to assess what depth of listening is required and to apply the strategies that are necessary to achieve the goal. Into the proactive strategies for listening, you will find 3 steps that make reference to 3 different moments into the lesson. These are pre-listening, during listening, and post-listening. So, into them you will find a step-by-step about what you need to do into every moment of the lesson. And if you pay attention, in the pre-listening, you will find task evaluation. Remember that this is the most important thing into the proactive strategy. Table 15.3 Avoidance and achievement strategies. The avoidance strategies are based on the message that is into the listening. It's basically how do you decode the message in 2 steps: generalization and message reduction. And then we have achievement strategies. These are based on sounds and words. In here you will find translation, keywords, prominence, and reliability, and so many others. The most important item in here is the item number 4. It is a kind of macro strategy which features hypothesis formation. Table 15.4 Prepared strategies. These strategies represent a point where the teaching of listening interacts with the teaching of speaking, because in here we are providing the learner with the correct forms of words to use when the requesting clarification is simple to do but carries a considerable benefits. In here we will find direct appeal for help, indirect appeal for help, request for repetition, request for clarification, request for confirmation, summary for speakers to comment on, and the most important, other checking strategies, which parallel speaking strategies.
Strategy instruction in a listening program. The training in strategy can be useful in a teaching of L2 listening. It helps the learner to make sense of spoken input in the early stage of what may be an extended listening program. Mendelssohn, 1894-38, even goes so far as to suggest that strategy use is the key of listening success, and that it should therefore form the principal part of any program. It is important to recognize the need to employ strategies and the type of strategy used according to the level of competence of the student. So, what is the challenge in the real world? The idea is to put more emphasis on the training strategy in the first days of the listening program, and not so much on improving listening skills. How to introduce strategy training? A short session is enough, just as the beginning of the program. But remember that the strategy training is not a substitute for intensive practice on the L2 input. The further to development of improved decoding skills, the student reduces his dependence on the use of the strategy. Now is the time to decide how explicit sensitization should be. 1. The teacher can name strategies and the student work in a conscious and reflective way. 2. The students are asked to comment in L1 or L2 about how they approach a specific problem. Now, an explicit approach in listening strategies. The general model of strategy training developed the importance of explicit teaching. That is, making students aware of the functions that each one performs. The characteristics of the models are: strategies are introduced individually. Strategies are explained explicitly to learners and even sometimes named. Strategies are modeled for the learners to emulate. Strategies are practiced in controlled tasks. Learners evaluate their own use of these strategies in less focused listening tasks. A strategy program should be to keep a learner with an awareness of what the choices are. This helps to his or her to opt for one strategy out of several that is most likely to resolve the problem of understanding that has arisen. For example, let us say that a learner encounters an unknown word in a piece of speech. Among her options are: ignore the word, accept an indeterminate idea of what the word means, infer the word's meaning from its context, or to get by without the utterance as a whole. Clearly, she cannot really make the best choice unless at the level of her mind she recognizes all the alternatives.
16.4 The problem solution issue. So, in here we will talk about the problem and the solution, about what kind of solution can we provide in order to solve the problem. Let's begin. Let's talk about the strategies. As we already know, strategies are adapted in order to deal with problems. Well, the strategy is select depending on the problem that we want to solve. The most common is the problem of understanding, but we must consider that the choice of a strategy varies from one situation to another and from one state to knowledge to another. For example, in here we will find so many problems that can arise into the lesson. For example, the problems that are posed by an unknown word, a failure of decoding, or an inability to trace connections between the speakers. Before we select a strategy, we must identify the problem, because the strategy needs to provide the things that we required to solve the problem. In order to construct a strategy based on the problem, we have 3 phases. The phase number 1 says identify problem, match to a strategy, and use the strategy. So basically, in the first one, The learner makes simple one-to-one matches between problems and solution. In the phase number 2, we have identify features of problem, match to a range of possible strategies, and choose the best strategy. So, in the second, she or he recognizes the characteristics that link certain problems and the fact that certain solutions represent alternative ways of handling the same problem. And in our last phase, we have analogy with earlier problems and use associated strategies. So basically, in the third phase, he or she should have accumulated enough experience of a strategy used to be able to match an incoming problem quite closely to a memory trace of an earlier one. That were the phases that we must consider in order to plan a strategy that can provide a solution for the problem. In here, we also have some considerations that must be clear for the teachers. Here we have identifying different types of problem of understanding. Establish links between problems and their solutions in the form of strategies. Establish links between alternative strategy solutions. And enable learners to assess which strategies that are productive and which are not. So, what we have said is that this model may help to guide the way in which the teachers think about the strategy training. The teachers might direct learners' attention in these steps. Firstly, towards specific problems of understanding. Secondly, towards the characteristics that some problems share and the choice solutions. And thirdly, towards a comparison with the earlier experience.
There are two ways of achieving the goals of the learning of listening, the general one and the local one. The local one is focused on the awareness. So, for example, we have like the cases of the students that maybe have like difficulties of understanding an audio for different reasons. So this chart will show us how this process occurs. In the first play, we have how the teacher plays a single extract in which learners start discussing about what it means and they are using their first language. In the second play, the learners listen again and think about it. They will decide if they wish to keep their first interpretation or they want to change it. Now we're moving to the feedback. So the peers report to the whole class what were the interpretations that were thinking about it and how confident they are about their thought. So the class attempts to decide who was right. The strategy review is in which the peers say how they arrive at their interpretations. The teacher will start writing on the board like a little list about the strategies that the couple made. They will start using the words and their own interpretation rather than the terminology. Now in the final play, the teacher plays the extract again and indicates the correct interpretation of it and start sharing about the thoughts of the students that were not accurate and start discussions about why was that the correct answer and why they maybe get wrong. So these kind of activities encourage the learners to be aware of the strategies that works for understanding the audios, for example. We are showing the students their own personal strategies preferences to understand. Also, we are creating conditions where learners employ strategic behavior to resolve problems of understanding. So they are reporting on what strategy was chosen and review other options that might have been taken and might have also worked in order to understand. It is recommended and might be very useful to dedicate a long session in order to promote the strategies of understanding how and which strategies you can use in order to reach a better understanding. So, for example, this kind of activity that we can see in this chart will improve this kind of movement. As you can see, the section is divided in several times of the class. So, for example, the pre-listening, the intensive and extensive listening, and the final listening. So we present the listeners the audios and they start recognizing which words and context of the audio. So they are start like analyzing the general questions and the context and attitude of the speakers. After that, they will take notes of the words or of everything that they recognize. After that, after the replay of the audios, the learners start like checking out the words that they have written and add to them what they really thought that they were listening. Again, we move to a replay in which they start interpreting about the context and the words that they have written before. After the feedback of the teacher, the students will recognize their mistakes and start thinking about why they choose a different option than the correct one. Finally, the teacher will show the script and they mark the areas that the students found very difficult. The class and the teacher review the problems and how they deal with all this. So basically, with all this, what we are trying to is that the students recognize the strategies that works for them and for the class in order to recognize correctly what they are listening. The repetition and the activities to improve the acquirement of the strategies of the listening can be very useful to start being good listeners in general.
For continue with the listening strategies, I'll be talking about generalized strategies and proactive strategies. First, for generalized strategies, in the book we can identify a small number of strategies of achievement which not depend on a specific context. This means that it can be used across a range of listening text. This one are for word level. The strategies are keywords. Learners associate words with the main topic. Sentence stress. They write words which carry sentence sense and prominence. They note down the sentence stress. Reliable syllables. They guess a whole word from a record. And finally, given new. Listen sample sentence and guess how will start the new part of the record. These strategies accord well with the direct approach. Next, for the proactive strategies. They are more likely to be used in certain types of listening context, and they are used to for 1. Evaluate text for deciding a level of comprehension. 2. At a pre-listening stage for create a predetermined mental stage. 3. During the listening to record specific words. 4. A post-listening stage to ensure the storage of information of the mentioned. Finally, as a final characteristic, these strategies can be integrated into a general comprehension lesson. That's all for the generalized strategies and proactive strategies. Thank you.